Chapter 308. The Enslaved Bride, Part 5. Before he impregnated Ikhlas, Maulana Abdul Razik enjoyed unquestionable spiritual authority in El Fasher city. His devotees worshipped him as a living saint and treated everything his hands touched as sacred objects. Whenever the blessed Imam finished his ritual cleansing, the devotees would drink that water as a blessing. Some of them loved to kiss his hands, others his feet, and yet others his holy garments. Maulana Abdul Razik was believed by all to have inherited the blessing from his great-grandfather who ousted the British people out of Sudan. This great-grandfather was believed to have received a divine revelation from Allah to proclaim himself as the awaited for Al-Mahdi, who was foretold by the Prophet Muhammad to prepare the way for the second return of Christ. Moreover, this awaited for Mahdi was believed to be the descendant of Al-Hasan, the son of the great Islamic Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet. Although many families in Sudan traced their origin to the Prophet of Islam, Maulana's family had unquestionable claim due to the fact that the Mahdi of Allah was born in that blessed posterity. Whatever the amount of truth or falsehood in that claim might be, Maulana Abdul Razik was considered by the simple people of Sudan to be divine by inheritance. Accordingly, the members of his family considered themselves to be the only right people to lead the country in religion and politics. In every election, the political party of that blessed family obtained the highest number of votes. Speaking in details about the religious and political claims of Maulana's family might need volumes to be written and therefore distract us from our narration. The most important thing need to be mentioned in a hurry was that the scandal began to cause some considerable damage to the reputation of the blessed Imam when the 6 witnesses overcame the impact of the shocking news. They passed the report to their wives. Their wives proclaimed it from the rooftops. The news fell in the people's ears like hot acid. They could not rest until they passed it on to 7 families. The new version of the scandal spread more quickly than the old one. No one was found who would dare to take an action against Maulana. Families discussed the scandal in their houses, students in their schools, employees in their offices, workers in their workplaces, and patients in the hospitals. No one took action against Maulana, until finally the baby was born. It was a baby girl. Maulana named her after his grandmother, Sakina. Someone by the name of Mr. Al-Dali, who was a political candidate and a rival to Maulana's son-in-law, waited patiently until the scandal became flesh and blood. Mr. Al-Dali was a lawyer and a leader of a terrorist political party known as the Muslim Brotherhood. This was the only terrorist group that had been approved by the ruling government because the president of Sudan himself belonged to that group. Mr. Al-Dali had campaigned in the last election, but he lost. He accused Mr. Al-Saab, who won the election, of forgery. In fact, Mr. Al-Saab made some women cast their votes 2 or 3 times. Those women veiled their faces and voted in different areas. Everyone knew this fact, but no one could prove it. The rival candidate, Mr. Al-Dali, objected to the election's result and lodged a complaint. Due to the lack of sufficient evidence, his lawsuit was rejected. In that way, Mr. Al-Dali, who was a highly educated man, lost the election, and Mr. Al-Saab, who was illiterate, won the contest. When the scandal erupted, Mr. Al-Dali was in the capital city. The news reached his ears just a few days before the baby was born. He travelled immediately from Khartoum to El Fasher and hid himself in his residence until the scandal became a human being. To secure his revenge, Mr. Al-Dali hired some spies to keep watch on Maulana's house so that the Dinka girl would not be smuggled out with her baby and hidden somewhere. He made sure that when the law stepped in, the culprit and his victim would be available for arrest. Being a lawyer, Mr. Al-Dali filed the lawsuit personally, and submitted it to the Sharia court. He preferred the Sharia court because if Maulana was proven guilty, which was likely to happen, then he would be stoned to death for committing adultery with a woman while he had a wife. In actual fact, Maulana's case was unique because he was believed to have committed this abomination while he was a sheikh, an old man, an imam, and a married man. There was a verse in the Quran that said, Al-Sheikh and Al-Sheikha, if they committed adultery, stone them completely. This verse was originally part of the Quran, but somehow got struck out of the holy text of Islam. In a hadith reported by al-Bukhari, the beloved wife of the Prophet, Aisha stated that the verse was in a scroll under her bed, but one day a goat came in and ate it up. The Prophet Muhammad married Aisha when he was 51 years old and she was 6 years old. He did not sleep with her until she reached the age of 9. No Muslim scholar until today was able to doubt the authenticity of that verse because it is mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, and al-Bukhari's collection of the Prophet's sayings was considered to be the most authentic book after the sacred Quran. Although that verse doesn't exist today, its legal power remains. Mr. Al-Dali also included in his lawsuit a complaint against slavery. According to the civil law in Sudan, no one had a right to enslave anyone. Mr. Al-Dali was aware that Islam did not condemn slavery in the past but in the contrary legalized it. Mu'allana would make a fool of himself if he tried to justify his deeds by referring to the Islamic law. As soon as the Sharia court received the complaint, it appointed a day for the hearing and invited the concerned parties. At the time Mu'allana Abdul Razik was sued for possessing and impregnating a girl, the judicial system in Sudan was in chaos. After the Sudanese independence in 1956, the judicial system followed a mixture of civil, criminal, and religious courts. The criminal and civil courts used the British law and some Sudanese customs and traditions to judge their cases. The civil court dealt with small cases such as quarrel between two neighbors, gossip, slander, and such. This court was not allowed to pass a sentence that exceeded 6 months. The Sharia court differed from the other two courts, because its rules were considered to be divinely revealed. At the time of the British, the Sharia court was allowed to deal with small cases such as family matters, a divorce, inheritance, or custody of children. A few decades after the British left Sudan, the Sharia court began to deal with serious cases such as murder, armed robbery, adultery, fornication, apostasy, and the like. Its penalties were cutting off hands and legs in the case of theft, flogging for fornication and drinking alcohol, stoning to death for adultery, beheading for murder and apostasy, and throwing the gays and the lesbians from high mountains. In case of Mu'allana Abdul Razik, he would be stoned to death if the Sharia court found him guilty of adultery. Proving adultery in Islamic law was the most difficult thing that a court could ever establish. For any case, the court would accept the testimony of 2 men or 4 women. According to the Quran, the testimony of 1 man equals the witness of 2 women, for the woman in Islam is believed to be deficient in religion and intellect. Adultery charges could be established only if 4 adult Muslim men or 8 adult Muslim women saw the adulterer and the adulteress in the very act and brought a thread and passed it between them. If the thread could not pass through the adulterer and the adulteress's bodies, that proved the muqal, the man's penis, in the marode, the woman's vagina. This might sound stupid because which adulterers would wait until some silly 4 witnesses bring thread and pass it between them? The number of witnesses in adultery was doubled due to the case of Aisha, the beloved wife of the Prophet Muhammad, and Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal. Aisha was accused of committing adultery with Safwan. She spent 2 nights in the desert with that handsome young guy. While the Prophet was in a dilemma of whether to divorce his beloved wife or keep her, a verse was revealed from heaven which justified Aisha. Those men and women who accused her were scourged 80 lashes each, and from that day onward, the number of witnesses for adultery was increased to 4 men or 8 women, and the thread method was introduced later on by the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Naturally, this impossible-to-prove method became a problem for Muslim scholars throughout the long history of Islam until the great Sudanese Muslim scholar of the 21st century, Dr. Hassan al-Turabi came. His Holiness, al-Turabi, being a jurist, was confronted with a serious case in which a group of wealthy and well-known men in Khartoum city were caught one day in a private garden dancing with lovely women who were neither their wives nor their sisters. The girls were bare naked and the men were in their underwear. Now, according to the Sharia law, there was no way to prove that the young women and the men committed adultery. The great scholar pondered on this serious issue for many days and finally came up with what he called al-Shiro fi al-Zina. According to that new law, Any man found standing, walking, talking, sitting, and traveling with a woman who was not his direct relative such as a wife or a sister would be held guilty of breaking that law. The punishment would be a scourging of 100 lashes if the culprit was an unmarried person and stoning to death if a married person. In the case of Mu'alana, the court did not need to apply the turban law nor the thread method, because the blessed Imam admitted in front of 6 male witnesses that he impregnated the Dinka girl without marrying her. So, he admitted his crime, if the case was proven to be a crime. According to the Sharia law, adultery can be proved through confession, pregnancy, or 4 witnesses. So, the virtuous Imam confessed it and the girl impregnated by him and in due time delivered his baby. On the trial day, the 5 judges who came to try the case arrived with a pre-decided sentence. They wanted to hear Mu'alana confirm the accusation and then pass the judgment of Allah on him. When Mu'alana appeared before them, the judges did not see tension or fear on his face. His eyes revealed that he enjoyed good sleep at night and never worried about the trial. Mu'alana Sheikh Abdul Razak, shouted one of the judges pointing his finger at the accused like a revolver, have you committed adultery with a woman who was not your lawful wife? The judge expected Mu'alana to admit his guilt so he could hit him immediately with the stoning sentence. Mu'alana remained silent for a while before he cleared his throat and answered the question with full confidence. The highly exalted Allah says in His gracious book, the Holy Quran, have sex with what pleases you from women in 2s, 3s, or 4s, and if you fear that you will not deal justly with them, then marry one woman or what your right hand possessed. Revered Judge, before I answer your question, can you explain to the court what you understand this verse to mean? The judge adjusted his glasses before answering, which gave him time to glance at his notes. This gracious verse gives the Muslim man the right to marry up to 4 women at a time. I understood that you already have 4 women in your ropes. The woman whose child you have fathered is not your wife. Mu'alana rolled his eyes and shook his head. Blessed Judge, you have not fully explained the verse I have read for you. You cut it into 2 halves and explained to the court only the first half. What do you understand by what your right hand possessed? The judge shrugged and answered, the slave women. What about the slave women? Are they not the Jawari? Mu'alana was talking faster now. Yes, they are. Mu'alana's voice rose in volume. Are we not allowed by this verse to sleep with them without marrying them? The judge fingered his neckline, his face reddening. Yes, the verse gives the Muslim man the right to sleep with his Jawari without the marriage contract, but there are no slave women today. I have not asked you to tell me more than the meaning of the verse. Mu'alana's face was changing color, and perspiration beaded his forehead. By now, other voices in the courtroom were beginning to murmur. Some men had their heads close together, nodding and shaking them alternately as they also debated the conclusion. The judge frowned and continued. But do you go and catch any woman in the street and sleep with her, and when the police arrested you, do you come and tell the court she is your slave? Mu'alana swiped his sleeve across his moist face and said, according to Islam, how can the Muslim man possess a slave woman? When the Muslim army invades a non-Muslim country in order to spread Islam and defeats its troops, then they have the right to possess their women as Jawari. The judge sniffed. Any good Muslim knew that answer. The murmurs in the court had gotten louder, escalating to a dull roar. Instead of wasting the time of the court, shouted another judge impatiently, let Mu'alana Abdul Razak prove to the court that he led a Muslim army, fought against the infidels, defeated them, possessed their women, slept with them, impregnated one of them and fathered her child, then and only then can we talk about Jawari. The second judge sat down, lips pursed in righteous indignation, and shouts of agreement erupted in the warm room. Mu'alana held up his hand for silence, secretly enjoying the drama of the moment. From this I understand that the blessed judge thinks that a Jariya is only the woman who possessed in war. Yes, shouted the same impatient judge. If a Muslim man slept with a Jariya who had been given to him as a gift or bought her with his money, would you call that zina, adultery? Mu'allana was now speaking at the top of his voice, motioning with one hand for effect. Yes, shouted the judge, hitting the table with his fist in anger. Mu'allana stood and waited in silence. Otherwise, said yet a third judge, you have to convince the court that you are the one who went to war and possessed the woman. Mu'allana had been waiting for just this moment. He scratched behind his ear and looked up at the audience in the room. What do you say about Maria, the Coptic Christian girl who was given as a gift to the Prophet Muhammad by the Mokokas, the king of Egypt? The 5 judges were finally confronted with a case that they could not contradict. If they said it was only the Prophet who had the right to sleep with a Jariya who was given to him, then Mu'allana would tell them why the Prophet said every Muslim should follow his example. There was a lot of foot scraping, paper shuffling, and murmuring of voices. The judges looked at one another in panic. When Mu'allana realized that none of the 5 judges wanted to answer his challenge, he continued his monologue. Let us go through the entire story of Maria the Coptic. The Prophet slept with her without marrying her because she was his slave girl. When his wife Hafsa, the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab, caught our blessed Prophet having sex with the Coptic girl, she said, in my night and on my bed, O the Messenger of Allah. Of course, in the beginning the Prophet felt sorry for what he did and asked Hafsa to keep the matter a secret. She was not to tell anyone, especially his beloved wife Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr. Moreover, he promised Hafsa that he would not touch Maria the Coptic girl again. What happened after that? Mu'allana paused and stared into the eyes of those who accused him. He pointed his finger at each in turn and said, Can any one of the blessed judges tell the court what Allah has revealed to the Prophet concerning this incident? Allah rebuked the Prophet, because he did not follow what was written in the Quran, said one of the 5 judges who had not spoken before and who was very interested in the topic of discussion. Mu'allana waited, still watching the judges' faces. O Prophet, why do you forbid what Allah has permitted? Why do you fear your wives when Allah alone you should fear? Read the 5th judge, who likewise opened his mouth for the first time and recited from the Quran. Allah bless you, our Sheikh, said Mu'allana Abdul Razak, inclining his head to the 5th judge, who recited the above gracious verse. This verse and the previous verse give every Muslim man the right to possess and sleep with his slave women. Why have I been called before this court for no crime committed by me except that I have done what our blessed Prophet did? A few throats were cleared. The room had become silent. But slavery is unlawful in Sudan, said the main judge. Mu'allana held up a restraining hand and said, Who made it unlawful? The British people or the Book of Allah? The 5 judges found themselves in a dilemma again. If they answered the British people, then they would contradict the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, which is obligatory beliefs for every Muslim. On the other hand, if they said the Quran, then they had to prove that the verses, which Mu'allana referred to, were abrogated by other verses of the Quran or a hadith of the Prophet. The judges of the Sharia court shut their mouths and waited as previously for Mu'allana Abdul Razak to answer his own question. Of course you cannot answer my question, because you people fear man more than you fear Allah. I know the judicial system in Sudan still depend on the British law, which was man-made law. Why should I refuse to follow the divine book of Allah and the Sunnah of our blessed Prophet Muhammad? There are no verses in the Quran or hadith of the Prophet, which state that slavery is unlawful. If any one of you can point to a verse or a hadith that prohibits slavery, then I am ready to be condemned for possessing a slave girl and illegally impregnating her. The hubbub in the room began anew. Based on the arguments of the blessed Mu'allana Abdul Razak, shouted the main judge, this court does finds him not guilty of any offence that contradicts the Book of Allah or the Sunnah of our gracious Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace of Allah be upon him. Accordingly, this court dismisses the lawsuit and gives permission to the blessed Mu'allana Abdul Razak to continue his relationship with his Jariya, Ikhlas. The public reacted to the verdict of the Sharia court with strong protest. Those called Sham Ashes in Sudan reacted violently against the outcome of the trial. Before we mention what they had done after the trial, we need to explain further who are they. The Sham Ashes are neither tribal people nor a small segment of society. The Sham Ashes formed over 80% of the population of Sudan. The word Shams in Arabic means sun. Therefore, the proper translation of Sham Ashes is the sun people. They spend most of their time working under the burning sun of Africa. The Sham Ashes were the heavyweight lifters, vegetable sellers, shoe polishers, loafers, beggars, and guards. Due to the bad economic condition in Sudan, the school teachers, factory workers, students, government employees, and small shops owners were also added to the list. It is a common practice in Sudan to find a person working as a schoolteacher during the day and as a taxi driver at night. Recently, even the university's professors were added to the group because their salaries were decreased to $20 per month. Those were the people who protested against the court decision on that day. They interpreted the decision as an open license for enslaving and abusing of African women by Arab men. The majority of the tribes that live in the western region of Sudan, in which the trial took place, are pure Africans, even though the government of Khartoum arbitrarily counted them as Arabs. The remaining tribes are called Jalaba, and they claim to be pure Arabs even though their features are African. Although slavery is common in Sudan, it disguised itself in various forms. If slavery is openly tolerated, then what would stop the Jalaba 25 from enslaving and raping the African women? Recent events in the western region of Darfur were exposed to the international media by the UN office, showing that the government of Khartoum trained and provided arms to the Arab tribes to commit genocide against the poor African tribes in Darfur province. The Janjaweed, warriors on horses or devils on horses, are well-trained and organized Arab militia who live in Darfur. The Islamic government of Khartoum organized, trained, and supplied those Janjaweed with weapons and horses for the purpose of Islamization and Arabanization of those African tribes. According to a report of Human Rights Watch, dated April 2, 2004, the Islamic National Front government of Khartoum was accused of recruiting and arming over 20,000 Muslim militiamen, called Janjaweed, to carry out attacks on civilians from the Fur, Masolit, and Zaghawa ethnic groups who, while also Muslims, are of African origin and make up the majority of the region's settled population. Very soon the world will hear that the Khartoum government has turned the Sudanese Arab tribes in the eastern region of Sudan against the Hayden Dawa, the so-called Fuzzy Wuzzy people. Due to those crimes, the President of Sudan is indicted by the International Criminal Court, ICC, of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. He is now wanted by the ICC. It is amazing that the Khartoum government believes Sudan is an Arab country, when more than 70% of the population of Sudan Africans. Still, the little soldiers, backed by the Islamic Front who came to power through coup d'état in 1989, make this claim. The Khartoum government website disputes its own belief in their online posting of the breakdown of Sudan's population. The Sudan population consisted of 52% Black, Africans, 39% Arabs, 6% Bajat, Haydandwe and other eastern tribes, 2% foreigners, probably the Falata, or the Nigerians, and 1% others, likely those considered as subhumans such as Baramilos. In order to prove to the world that Sudan an Arab country, every African tribe would have to convert to Islam and become Arab. Until then, the Janjaweed will continue the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Sudan's west and south. Perhaps, the Shukriya and Rashida will also carry guns against the Bajat tribes in the eastern region soon. There was no peaceful demonstration in Sudan. When workers, students, and employees joined a strike accompanied by the rest of the Sham Ashes, then there would be heavy destruction and causalities involved. It had happened only twice in the recent history of Sudan that the Sham Ashes went on the streets and overthrew two bad governments. In fact, after the British left Sudan in 1956, there was no good government, and the worst of all recent governments was that of the fanatic Muslim Brotherhood. The first revolt resulted in the famous October Revolution and the second in the April Uprising. Unfortunately, in both revolutions Maulana Abdul Razak's family stole the efforts of the Sham Ashas and ruled the country. On the day of Maulana's court case, the police authorities had anticipated the uprising and hence escorted Maulana Abdul Razak and the 5 judges out of the court under heavy security. Nevertheless, the Sham Ashas showered the police van with stones and bricks. 6 policemen were injured and the police van was smashed. 2 of the judges were hit by stones and rushed to the hospital. One of them unfortunately died on the way to the hospital. The second one reached the hospital with a fractured skull. The other 3 judges received minor injuries. Everyone in the police van was hit by a stone or a brick except the Blessed Imam, Maulana Abdul Razak. He was sandwiched between 2 policemen who acted as his guards. Before Maulana was taken to his house, the police authority sent ahead 6 police cars loaded with armed security men. They surrounded his residence and prevented anyone from coming close to it. All 4 roads that led to Maulana's residence were closed and policemen posted in each street. Meanwhile the Sham Ashas continued to shout their protests and marched in every street. Before they left the courtroom they smashed the windows, broke the doors, and set fires in the garbage containers located near the court building. The police authority desperately tried to control the mob but it was impossible. The angry Sham Ashas marched to the main market and caused much damage, destroying everything they possibly could. Like a herd of wild elephants, the Sham Ashas tore down shops, smashed cars, destroyed shacks, attacked some rich people's houses, and set fire to the ruins. Many shops and government buildings were looted. On that day, some poor people became rich and rich became poor. The Sham Ashas expressed their protest and anger in every possible way. It was only when the top officials in the police authority called in the military army that the giant mob began to disperse under the heavy fire of the soldiers. Many people were shot and killed. Some boys were trampled under feet and badly wounded. Even some old men and children died due to stampede. There was chaos and confusion everywhere. Some Sham Ashas broke into people's houses to seek shelter from the rain of the military live bullets. At daybreak, there were only dead bodies and soldiers on the streets. The government authority declared full curfew for 3 days. The local radio and TV stations announced that anyone leaving his house would be shot by the soldiers and the police. The people were forced to stay at home and eat whatever they had. After those 3 days the general curfew was lifted gradually. The people continued to receive orders and instructions through their radios and TV channels. They were threatened with death if they disobeyed those instructions. People starved inside their homes for 1 week. The mayor of El Fasher city was a communist. He promised the public to refer the case of Maulana Abdul Razak to the criminal court. He openly condemned slavery and threatened to punish any citizen found guilty of that unlawful practice. Therefore, the mayor's speech, which was broadcasted through the local radio and TV channel, cooled down the wrath of the Sham Ashas.